So I'll get started. So growing up competing in the sport of gymnastics that I think very similarly to tennis is centered around perfection. That's something that affected me personally in the sense that this perfectionism became tied to my self-worth. And for a long time, I really prided myself on that. So by way of background, my gymnastics career began when I was 8 years old. And in the world of gymnastics, trust me when I tell you that is far too late to start recreational classes. So I learned pretty early on that it was too late for me to consider pursuing an elite level gymnastics path with international or Olympic level competition dreams. But I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and my parents took my sisters and I to the college competitions at UCLA. And I idolized those college athletes, and I promised myself that one day I would compete in college too. So similarly to a lot of you all, I devoted my life to the strict demands that accompanied this goal. I was practicing 6 hours a day, 6 days each week by the time I was 10 or 11. And I was proud of it. I made sure everyone knew that around me knew that I was a gymnast. It's a funny, kind of embarrassing thing to look back on, but in middle school and even through high school, like the top of my leotard peered through my shirt every single day. For some reason, I think I thought it would take too much time to change when I got to the gym. I think I was just excited to be there and didn't want to waste any time. So quickly, I learned that, in my eyes, the best athletes were those that were the perfectionists and those that were obedient. So I vowed to be the best listener and the hardest worker. And like I said, I think most athletes pride themselves on their perfectionism. I think, if you look at the nature of sport and all of its intensity, which is really what makes it so extraordinary, every day at practice, we are critiqued by our coaches to develop the best technical form, strongest power, top skill. In the sport of gymnastics, we're judged from the ideal 10.0, and our mistakes are then aggressively deducted until we see our final score. And the crazy thing about it is that we ask for this critique every single practice. How do we reach perfectionism if we aren't perfect? Well, I'm going to share a phrase with you all that I wish I had known during my years as a gymnast, which is perfectionism paralyzes potential. You see, there are many symptoms that accompany perfectionism, such as a high-functioning depression, which for me, I like to say it felt like acting, a fear of failure, a regular procrastination, so that maybe you're reluctant to start a task out of hesitation that you won't be able to complete it perfectly, or an inability to relax or relax without feeling guilty. And I think this goes hand in hand with some of the phrases we commonly hear in practice when we're dealing with injuries, like no pain, no gain, or in gymnastics, when I was dealing with a mental block, we would tell ourselves, don't think, just go. But I think concealing our mental and physical struggles really does make them harder to overcome and can lead to both physical injury and mental health challenges. I should know I did experience both of these consequences during my collegiate career. So committing to Towson University's D1 team was an absolute dream come true. And as I carried myself through club gymnastics, clinging to this idea of perfectionism, I planned to do the same in college, in the gym, and in the classroom. But college was a really big transition, and I began to notice that I was falling short of perfection pretty quickly. I remember several practices during my freshman year where I would stand up on the beam for so long. I was so scared to go for skills that I had mastered for years in club, because my mind was set on this idea that if I didn't make this skill perfectly at this one practice in September, my coach wouldn't trust me to compete me in January. I didn't communicate that though. I was determined to never show weakness, and I was afraid of both my coach's response and, again, that potential to be removed from competition. But my fear of failure began to affect almost every area of my life. I thought that I might have been falling into a depression, but I also thought that sounded dramatic, so I convinced myself I was just saying I was depressed as an excuse to justify why I wasn't doing well in the gym. Instead of seeking help from my teammates and my coaches, I just kept pushing. I knew, of course, becoming perfect wouldn't be easy, so how could I expect to get any closer if I granted myself that opportunity to rest? But I was wrong, and because I tried to hide it for so long, I didn't compete my freshman year due to my struggles with depression. I found myself standing next to teammates on the sidelines who had glaring physical injuries, and so I felt like depression wasn't a valid enough reason to be out of competition, and of course the stigma around mental health agreed with me. But on my journey to wellness, I learned to use athletics as my outlet for all my emotions, and I really did fall in love with the sport all over again. But just a few days before I was supposed to compete for the first time in college, I ruptured my Achilles while I was tumbling on floor. And I remember I knew before I tumbled that day that my Achilles felt tight, but I was so excited for competition and I was still so afraid to fail that I just suppressed any communication. I kind of judged myself for even like considering letting that pain lessen my assignment for that day. And so I didn't speak up. And one of the biggest realizations I had immediately after being taken down to the training room and finding out that my Achilles was fully ruptured was that, with my Achilles, I now had this step-by-step recovery plan that, though it was almost a year long, I knew I would compete the next year. And there was not that same clarity when I was struggling with depression. And again, that very next weekend after I got hurt, I faced a similar reality. I was standing on the sidelines of the meet then my sophomore year. And I realized that, both setbacks, both physical and mental, were valid. I learned that rest was a good thing, and that in the context of my Achilles, it was absolutely necessary if I ever wanted to return to competition. And I learned that, while it was important to listen to my body and its aches and pains, I had to give the same attention to listening to my mind. So I know we have a lot to get into, so I'll kind of cut it there. But just to end, I learned that while perfectionism may paralyze our potential, shifting my mindset to appreciate these setbacks was actually a good thing. And I don't actually love the word failure because I think it's really about what you learned. And I think that I like to say, I didn't fail, but I fell. So anyways, I'll let you take it from here, David.